In this video, we are going to put together our contacts activity. Now, our contacts activity isn't actually going to have much content in it. Really, all it's going to contain is a toolbar and our nav drawer. So basically, all it is it's a container of our two fragments that we created in the last video, the contacts fragment and the pending contact requests fragment. And then the spinner allows us to switch between the two. So I want to go ahead in this video and just put together that container so that we can switch between those two fragments. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to do is I want to open up my resource, my layout file for my contacts activity. So a couple ways I can do this. I could go all the way down to resource layout activity contacts, or I could open up my contacts activity.java file or contacts activity.java file and control click on activity contacts. Either way, we now are in our activity contacts layout file. Now basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and expand this include. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to go ahead and grab this include toolbar, just copy and paste it right here where this include statement is, effectively getting rid of the include. So I'm going to jump down here to include toolbar. I'm going to grab all of this code, hit Control C, jump back into activity contacts, take this include, delete it, and hit Control V for the toolbar. Now, why did I do that? The answer is basically what I want to do is I want to put a spinner control inside of the toolbar, which means that we need to not use the include and instead use our own toolbar. Or bring in our own toolbar view. So to do that, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove that that end tag and create, or the self-closing tag, and I'm going to create my own end tag here. And inside of here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a spinner. So we're going to create a spinner, and he will have a layout width of wrap content, a layout height of match parent. Next up, I'm going to give him an ID. So the ID will be activity contacts spinner. And I'm also going to give him a style. And the style I'm going to give him is a style that hasn't been created yet. It's going to be a style slash widget dot yora dot toolbar dot spinner. So this doesn't exist quite yet, but we'll create it here in a minute. So after we do that, let's go ahead and jump down to this text view. I'm going to remove this text view. It's no longer needed at all, really, because that text view only existed there previously so that we could just show that we moved to the contacts window. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace it with a frame layout. And I'm going to give the frame layout a width of match parent and a height of match parent. And I'm also going to give a frame layout the ID of activity contacts fragment container. And so what's going on here is I want a container frame layout that I can put where I can put my fragments. So when I switch in my spinner to another fragment, I want to replace the contents of that frame layout with the new fragment. And that's where that fragment is going to go. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up our activity contacts layout. We don't really have anything else left to do here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to implement this style. And that's pretty easy to do. I just put my keyboard cursor here on the red and hit Alt-Enter and say create style value resource. Hit Enter. And, well, actually I'm just going to go ahead and create this manually. So to create it manually, because that wizard unfortunately didn't include the way, or didn't set up the way I wanted it to. So to create it manually, I'm going to go ahead and select all this text, Control copy it. Come down here to my resource folder, my values folder, open up my styles.xml folder, and then inside of my styles, I'm going to create a new style. So I'm going to say style name equals widget yora toolbar spinner, and then I'm going to say parent equals widget app conpat light spinner drop down action bar. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in some values here to make it a little bit nicer looking. So I'm going to say item name equals Android background. And we're going to give it a background of Android selectable item background. We're going to give it a item name, in this case Android drop down selector, and we're going to give question mark Android selectable item background. So the same value in both of those. We're going to give it an item name of Android divider, and we're going to give it a value of @null to clear out the divider. And we're going to give it an Android divider height of 0 dp. And we're going to give it an item name of Android overlap anchor of true. So what are we doing here? Well, we're just declaring a reusable spinner style, and we're also changing some values of it so that it appears similar to how a title would appear in our toolbar. So there's no background and there's no divider or anything like that, and we're clearing that out. And we're putting it into a reusable style so that if any other application or other activity in our application used this style of navigation, which that sentence rhymed, we could just reuse this same spinner style. Anyway, now that I have that, let's jump into our contacts activity, because this activity is actually going to be a little bit more straightforward than you think. All we have to do is get a reference to our spinner and change what fragment is going to be displayed depending on what the spinner value is. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and create my fields first, and I'm going to create an object animator, and I'll say current animation. So the animation here is going to be when we switch, as you see right here, when we switch to a different tab, I changed the color of the toolbar as a kind of really nice little effect right there. And I really like that effect. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to bring up my notifications window. I'm going to create an animator that's responsible for doing that translation between the two values. Then I'm going to create a private array adapter of, and now this class doesn't exist yet, but it will, contacts spinner item. I'll call this adapter. So I guess before I move on to the onCreate method, I'm going to create the contact spinner item. So basically, as you should be able to infer at this point, a spinner acts like a list view. Almost exactly like a list view. The only difference is that it doesn't show all its items at once. It only allows you to pick one. So our items that we add into our adapter are going to be of this special class called contacts spinner item. And he's going to have a private final string title, a private final int color, and a private class fragment. So the title should be self-explanatory. That is the title of this particular fragment. The color is also self-explanatory. That's the color the toolbar is going to change to when we switch that fragment. And then the class fragment is a reference to the actual fragment class, so it knows how to instantiate that. Okay, let's really quickly add all our members here. I'm going to start off with creating the constructor. So Alt insert constructor, and then I'm going to hit Shift down arrow to select all three of those values. Then I'm going to hit Alt insert getter, select all three of these values to create 3 getters. And then at the bottom, I'm going to say Alt insert overriding member to string, and I'm simply going to return get title. So a really, really quick way to create DTO classes like that. And Java is a very verbose language. You've heard me say that a million times. Getting to know the shortcuts is important. So be sure to practice that. Even if you have to pause the video to go through and remember, okay, that was Alt insert and type in that, just get in the habit of using it. It'll save you so much time. Okay, so now let's scroll all the way back up to the top and implement our onCreate. So after we set the nav drawer, what I want to do here is I'm going to say adapter equals new array adapter. We can take out that generic type parameter there. And I'm going to pass in contacts activity, I'm going to pass in just this. For the layout resource, now this is interesting. There's actually going to be 2 layouts that we're going to be using. One is going to be the layout. So let me just show you this. It'd be easier than just trying to explain it. There's going to be 2 layouts that are used on the spinner control. The first layout is used for these items. You see these 2 items that popped up in this little pop-up window, our contacts and our pending friend requests? That is a particular layout. The other layout is the layout that's used for the current selected item. That's what you see right here. This little contacts with that little drop-down arrowy thing, that is a different layout file. So we need to specify 2 layout files. How do we do that? Well, we specify one layout file in the constructor of the array adapter, and we specify the other layout file in a additional method invocation. Now, the constructor layout file is going to be the layout file that's responsible for what you see right here. The contacts, the name contacts with the little drop down. So that's what I'm going to do right here. I'm going to say, for the layout of the array adapter, I'm going to pass in r.layout.list_item_toolbar_spinner. Now that layout file doesn't exist yet, but it will here in a little bit. We'll finish up the code first, and then we'll implement that layout file. So then what I want to do is I need to specify the secondary layout file, which I specify by saying set dropdown view resource. In this case, I'm going to pass in android.r.layout.simple list item 1, just a classic, simple, basic list item. And that's it. Now I'm going to go ahead and add my tabs. So I'm going to say adapter.add, and I'm going to instantiate a new contact spinner item. The first one's going to say contacts for the title. And then for the color, so this is interesting. We're using an int color. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say color.parseColor. And for this color, I'm going to use hash 00bcd4. And then finally, for the class fragment, I'm going to pass in context fragment.class. Okay, so that's our first item. Let's do our second item. Our second item is our pending friend request, but I'm going to do something a little different here. I'm going to say adapter.add, add new contact spinner item, and I'll say pending contact requests. And instead of saying color.parseColor here, I'm going to load this from a resource, just to show you guys another example of how we can get colors in Android. So I'm going to say get resources dot get color, and I'm going to pass in an ID of r.color dot, I'm going to say, it's called this contacts pending contact requests. Then for the class, I'm going to pass in pending contacts request fragment.class. Now this is a really long line of code, so I'm going to go ahead and split it up so you guys can see it line by line here. So what I decided to do here was to show you guys that we can also get the color from a resource file. Now why would you want to do that? Well, it's a separation of concerns sort of thing. It allows us to specify our colors in this reusable resource XML file, and it also allows us to change that XML value on a per variant basis. So for example, you can say on devices on this version, use this color, and on devices on that version, use that color. Now that doesn't sound very useful, and it probably isn't, but it just points out that you can do that sort of flexibility here. So for this, let me go ahead and just generate this color for you guys real fast. I'm going to hit Alt-Enter, and I'm going to say create color resource, or sorry, I'm going to say create color value resource, hit Enter. And for the resource value, I'm going to go ahead and type in the number, or not the number, the hex value of this resource. And in this case, it's going to be 607 D8B. D8B. That kind of tealish gray. And then I'll go ahead and hit OK. And what that did is it created this color inside of my colors.xml file. So just showing you guys a really quick way of how you can A, use a hex value straight up in code, or B, extract your color from a resource file. All right, now that we've done that, let's go ahead and set up our spinner. So I'm going to say spinner, not sparse boolean, right? Spinner, coming from android.widget. And I'm going to say spinner equals cast a spinner, find view by ID, r.id, spinner. So in this case, action or activity contact spinner. Then I'm going to say spinner.setAdapter, and then I'm going to say spinner.setOnItemSelectedListener equals this. Now you'll notice that we get some red squigglies here. We get some red squigglies because we're setting the onItemSelectedListener to this, which is the contacts activity, but our contacts activity doesn't implement the correct interface. So to fix that, we use our good old friend Alt-Enter when we place our keyboard cursor on the squigglies, hit Alt-Enter, and then instead of saying cast parameter, we select make contacts activity implement. We select that, and we select enter. And really all that happened right here is this word appeared up here that implements on item selected listener, and two method implementations were written, on item selected and on nothing selected. Now there's one last thing we need to do on our create, and that is setting our action bar's title to blank. That's because our spinner is effectively replacing our title bar. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say get support action bar dot set title null. And that's it. Now what I want to do is let's go ahead and implement our layout file here. So let's place our keyboard cursor on the layout file, and I'm going to hit Alt-Enter and say create layout resource file, and enter. I actually didn't want a linear layout. I wanted a text view. So to do that, to fix this really quickly, I'm going to make it a self-closing element, and then I'm going to change it from a linear layout to a text view. For the layout width and layout height, I'm going to make it wrap content, and I'm going to remove the orientation attribute. So now all we should have is a one element called a text view that has the XML namespace specified and our width and our height specified to be wrap content. Now let's go ahead and give it some values. I'm going to give it a padding start of 16 dp. I'm going to give it a padding end of 4 dp. I'm going to give it a text color of white. So FFF for white. I'm going to give it a text size, not text scale, text size of 18 SP. I'm going to give it a text style of normal, and I'm going to give it a drawable padding of 4 dp and a drawable end of spinner triangle. So at drawable spinner triangle. Okay, so that's a lot of attributes. What am I doing here? Well, all I'm doing here really is two things. First of all, I'm mimicking the style of the toolbar's title, because that's basically what we're replacing what the spinner is replacing, the toolbar's title. Then what I'm doing is something else that's interesting here. I'm doing this drawable thing. What is this drawable thing? Well, on text views have drawable starts and drawable ends, and what they are images that can be placed and rendered from within the text view. So effectively what I'm doing here is I'm saying that I want the drawables in this text view to have a 4 dp padding. Then I want at the end of the spinner item, I want to draw a spinner triangle. And that's it. So now our code should compile. There shouldn't be any reason why our code doesn't compile. I want to go ahead and hit play. I want to see what our code does right now and see if it completely blows up, because I don't think I've started this even after we wrote that class in the last video. So let's go ahead and start it. What we should see at this point, it shouldn't be functional, but what we should see is a spinner with 2 items in it. So that's what I'm going to be looking for here. So let's go ahead and log in real fast. Log in. Let's go ahead and jump into our contacts. And what we see here is we see our contacts here. And unfortunately, we have a slight issue, a couple issues. First of all, our triangle is a little bit too big. And second of all, our background is unfortunately very dark. So I want that to be white instead. All right, well, it turns out that I made a small mistake in which folder I included this drop-down icon in. It should have been in the extra large definition folder instead of the medium large definition folder, and so I was getting confused of how big that icon was supposed to be rendering. As far as the problem internally with the color, it's because right here we specified the theme of the toolbar to be using the dark action bar, which I'm going to remove that and instead use the light action bar for this one view. Now, fortunately, there's not going to be a single difference, and the reason, other than the pop-up menu being correct now, and the reason for that is we're overwriting the foreground color. Either way, we now have proper setup for our spinner. So that's pretty awesome. Now all that's left to do is hook up our fragments. So let's jump back into our contacts activity and implement our onItemSelected method. Pretty straightforward. The first thing I need to do is I need to get the item that we just selected. So I'm going to say contact spinner item, and we'll just call this item, equals adapter.getItem at position. So just like what we do with list views. Then I'll say if item is null, return. Then I'm going to say if current animation is not null, then current animation.end. Then I'm going to say int current color. So I need to get to interpolate between the toolbar's colors. I need to get the current color of the toolbar. To do that, I'm going to say cast to color drawable toolbar.getBackground.getColor. So I'm getting the toolbar's background, I'm casting it to a color drawable, and then I'm extracting the color from that. Now I can start my animation. So I can say current animation equals object animator dot of object, passing in our toolbar. The property is background color, so background color. The evaluator will be a new ARGB evaluator. And then the start and the finish is going to be current color, and then the finish is going to be item.getColor. Then I'm going to say set duration of 250 milliseconds, and then I'm going to say current animation dot start. Now, you might be wondering why I'm not using the built-in there is a way of doing an object animator dot of AARGB or whatever that will do all this ARGB evaluator and stuff for us, but it's not compatible with anything before Android 5. So we're using this syntax in order to stay compatible with Android 4 as well. Then what I need to do is I need to get the fragment. So I've started the animation to change the background color of the toolbar. Now I need the fragment. So I'm going to say fragment, and then I'm going to say try. I'm going to open up a try block, and I'm going to say fragment equals cast to fragment item.getFragment.new instance. So this is the class of that fragment. Then I'm going to say catch exception e, and I'm just going to say e.print stack trace and return. So if there's an exception instantiated in the fragment, perhaps there's no default constructor, we'll just print our stack trace and return. I could alternatively do log.e could not instantiate, or sorry, for the tag would be contacts activity, and the message would be could not instantiate fragment plus item get fragment dot get name, and then pass an e. So I could do that either, or as well, if I wanted to. So either way, we have to handle the exception of if this fails, because Java. All right, so then we'll do get fragment manager dot begin transaction dot set custom animation of android.r.animator dot fade in, comma android r animator fade out. So that's our fragment animation. Dot replace r.id.contacts fragment container, and then the thing that we're replacing is going to be fragment, and then dot commit. So all this does is this code just replaces that whatever the contents of that fragment container are with the newly instantiated fragment, and it also sets up an animation to fade in and fade out the previous fragment and the new fragment. So now let's hit play and see how far that gets us, because we should be just about done with the contacts activity. Of course, we still need to implement the fragments, but we'll do that here soon. Alrighty. So we see the color changing. That is a very, very good sign right here. However, we don't see the fragments view inside of here. So that's kind of concerning. Let's go ahead and figure out why that might be. Let's jump into activity contacts here, open up our preview window, make sure that my frame layout is indeed where I think it should be. And where I think it should be is basically in this linear layout, filling in the rest of the space. Let's also make sure that I have my ID set properly. And it seems that I do. Possibly we're getting an exception. So let's check our logcat as well. And we're not getting anything in the logcat. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make sure that we are getting here. Just really, really quickly, what I'm doing here, the way I'm debugging this is I want to make sure that I'm getting to this line of code, but I'm also wanting to make sure that logcat isn't broken. So this code should always, so we do get to that line of code. So that's I guess that's a sign. Let's see here. Scroll up to the top. Ignore me. Actually, the code is working. Everything was working. There's nothing to worry about. I got some memories mixed up. Remember how in our other stubbed out activities, like our add contact, I put in this this text view right here? Well, I didn't do that in our fragments. So like, for example, our fragment contacts, it's just a list view inside of here, as well as our fragment pending. I can test this real fast just by temporarily replacing the list view. So I'm just going to set the list view right here just to make sure everything is working the way it should. So we'll put a list view there, and then on our pending contacts, it doesn't matter. That can be blank. I don't really care. Then let's hit run, and we should see some text here. Just making sure everything's working. You guys don't have to obviously follow along with this. I just want to make sure I didn't make any mistakes here. And as we see, contacts appears. So everything is working. There's no cause for panic. Alrighty. So really, that pretty much wraps this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed adding a awesome spinner to your contacts. This is actually a very flexible design technique, and it might not be a bad idea to create a base activity or a reusable class that does this logic for you. But since it's the only place, this is the only place that we need this logic in this application, I decided to put it directly into the contacts activity. So, not a whole lot of code, surprisingly, for what it does. All right, we'll see you guys in the next video.